Hi, hello, and welcome. If you know anything about me, I love the Zelda series. I always have, ever since I was a little kid, my first Zelda game being A Link to the Past, and it's always gripped me. I've always loved it. I was thinking, you know what? I love this series so much. What would happen if I just replayed them all? Because I have most of them at my disposal now, and did a little series on it. So here we are. That's what we're going to be talking about, a little Zelda retrospective, if you will. Now you may be thinking, oh, it's going to start with Zelda 1, or Zelda 2, or Zelda Link to the Past, because that's the one that he started with. No. We're not going to go with any of those. We're going to go with one that I had never played before until 2024. Fresh eyes, no nostalgia glasses. That game is The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Ages.
When I say I went into this game blind, I really do mean it. I knew nothing of the story, dungeons, bosses, gameplay, or anything else about it really. I somehow missed this game and its sister game, Oracle of Seasons, back when they released. So to my pleasant surprise, I immediately found the game to be more in the vein of, say, Link's Awakening or, to a lesser extent, Minish Cap. With the initial intro cutscene alone, I could tell this game would be special. What I didn't expect was a game that definitely marched to the beat of its own drum, yet still felt like a mainline Zelda. This game wasn't as wacky and different from a typical Zelda game like Minish Cap was, but it wasn't a normal Zelda game either. Even before playing the game, I should have caught on to this. I mean, there are two games that release beside each other. That's weird already. That's not typical Zelda, especially at the time of release back in 2001. Sure, you'd see this with game series like Pokemon, but Zelda? Weird. The developers also implemented unique features like another map when going underwater in lakes or large bodies of water. It was a really fun surprise to see this addition and really reminded me of later Zelda games. Looking at you, Tears of the Kingdom. Once I got into the game, I was pleased to see a genuine attempt at story. Now, the story isn't mind-blowing, even for the time of release, but it's a sufficient one that involves something that is always a welcome addition. New characters to the Zelda series. You, Link, show up to the land of Labrina? I'm just going to call it Labrina. You meet a familiar character to the Zelda series, Impa, but then meet another familiar character that is odd to see. Well, odd to see in a human form. This character is Nehru. Like Nehru the goddess, that one. Anyway, once you meet the few familiar characters, you are then introduced to Ralph, the super friend who is sort of your rival throughout the game in a similar way to the earlier Pokemon games. And you're introduced to Queen Ambi. Amidst these introductions, the villain is revealed as Viren, an evil presence that invades others' bodies and disguises themselves, all while making their evil plans come to fruition. It's a good story throughout with a sufficient conclusion, but again, it's nothing revolutionary. What shines are the characters themselves. Though their dialogue is typical of the time period, I mean, what would you expect from a Game Boy title? The character designs, their interactions, and the sheer variety is incredibly welcome. My personal favorites were the Toke and Moosh. The Toke are a humanoid lizard race who steal all your stuff when you shipwreck on their island, then play it off like they had the stuff already. I love that they were basically like, yo, we didn't take your stuff, we found it, but you can have it back out of the goodness of our hearts. I enjoyed Moosh because, well, simply put, it's a giant flying bear named Moosh. Moosh. Moo. Characters are a bit eccentric and abnormal to the Zelda series, and I love them because of those characteristics. What I didn't love, though, was the color usage in the game. Yes, I understand this is a Game Boy game, but when comparing to a game like, say, Link's Awakening DX, it just doesn't have that same, pop. Sure, there are nice colors used in certain areas, but everything feels very washed out. Again, I recognize this was due to the time period the game was created, but I wish they had done a little more. Thankfully, the music is tied to the time period in all the right ways. I absolutely loved the music in this game. There were a couple songs that just didn't do it for me, but just about everything else was a hit. The music is exactly what you'd expect from a Game Boy title made in the early 2000s, but the composers, who appear to be M. Madachi and Kyopi? Anyway, they did an excellent job. Though I love the music, however, I can see why others may not. A lot of songs have some dissonance in them, meaning that the notes blend musically but may not sound like they necessarily go together. This reflects the game and which time period you're in. I also love the little details that were created, like with Lina City, regarding the time periods. In this game, you travel between the past and present, and when you are in Lina City, the tempo changes between the two musical pieces. In the past, the song is much slower, and I swear I hear a bit of dissonance in some background notes. while the present song is much happier and upbeat. It may be a small addition, but it completely changes the feel of the city and adds more depth to the story unfolding in each era. And speaking of era, as mentioned before, the main mechanic of this game is traveling between the past and present. Sound familiar? That's never been a part of a Zelda game before, right? You can use the Harp of Ages to travel across time, but at first it's very limited. You can travel one way with the harp, but must find specific spots to trigger and move across time the other way. Later in the game, you'll learn a song that allows you to travel at will. I thought I would hate this limitation, but honestly, it was great. What made it great for me was the usage of time travel with the puzzles in the game, both in the overworld and in the dungeons. This mechanic plays heavily in the puzzles and makes this Zelda really stand out. A great example of this is with a dungeon you come across later in the game. If you'd like to skip these minor spoilers, you can skip ahead to the timestamp here. When I came across the mermaid dungeon in both the past and the present, I was quite interested. Up till this point, dungeons were typically in one time or the other, even if they may have time puzzles within them. I quickly realized that I needed to do 2 different mini-quests to gather a past and present key, which would open their respective door in the appropriate time period. But the cool time mechanic didn't stop there. I then had to go into both dungeons to complete the dungeon as a whole. The final boss was in one dungeon, but I needed certain items to use from the other. I absolutely love this and wish the game did a little more of this specifically with dungeons. Because of the usage of the time traveling mechanic with this dungeon, this was easily my favorite of the group. The downside to heavily leaning on the time traveling mechanics with puzzles, however, isn't perfect. There were some puzzles that just seemed too obscure to solve. In fact, there were a couple times I almost gave up and looked up how to proceed in an online guide. Once I figured them out, I didn't feel very satisfied with the outcome. I felt like I had been cheated a bit by the solution. Good thing, though, that the mechanic is used in great ways much more often than not. Speaking of obscure, the bosses in this game follow the same formula you've probably gathered by now. They are weird and wacky in relation to other Zelda games, but use the same typical Zelda formula in the battle itself. Sadly, I didn't care for the bosses, with the exception of any battles with Viren. Most bosses were forgettable to me. I honestly couldn't tell you the name of any of them off the top of my head, and the one I do remember is for all the wrong reasons. There is a boss later in the game who is let's call it a moving rock statue. I got through 2 phases, and when I hit the 3rd, I was stumped. When I eventually figured out how to beat the boss, I was more annoyed than anything. It's a real shame, as Zelda games are really known for their dungeons and bosses, but Oracle of Ages is very meh in this aspect for me. It isn't that the bosses are bad. There's standard Zelda formula here that typically uses a newly discovered item as the main weapon. It just feels like the developers tried to be a little too clever for their own good and ended up creating boss battles that were overthought. Like I said previously, I did enjoy the Viren battles, largely because the gadgets in this game are delightful. Like so many other facets of Oracle of Ages, there are the normal Zelda staples, like the Mirror Shield and bombs. But where it gets different, and where I personally love it, is that not every gadget is needed or necessary. There are weapons and gadgets that are completely missable, but they make the experience that much better. Not everyone does so, like the aforementioned Mirror Shield, but the new items to use are what really made me love this game. Weapons that double as gadgets like the Seed Shooter are unique and open possibilities for new types of puzzles. This item can be used as a gadget to light distant fires or cause confusion in enemies. It can also be used as a weapon, such as lighting enemies on fire. But my absolute favorite gadget that completely caught me by surprise was the Switch Hook. When I first acquired it, I thought it would just be a simple hook shot or grapple, but it goes a little further than that. When you find something it will latch onto, you will switch places with that item. See a distant pot that is across a ravine? Switch places to get to the other side. Want to break a pot without having to go into your menu, switch to the power bracelet, leave the menu, lift and throw the pot, then go back into the menu and switch out for another item? The Switch Hook not only switches your place with the pot, it breaks it for you. By the way, as a side note, having to go into the menu to switch any item was incredibly cumbersome. This is an area that the Zelda series seems to have never figured out how to streamline. Again, looking at you, Tears of the Kingdom. Anyway, I wish the Switch Hook had made it into other Zelda games, but it never did to my knowledge, and that's kind of a shame. What makes this game so enjoyable is the risks that the developers took without losing that traditional Zelda feel. It adds to the Zelda series by walking that tightrope between the familiar and taking measured risks. It may sound odd, but I see a lot of the same DNA in the latest Zelda games like Breath of the Wild in Oracle of Ages. Sure, there is only one way to solve many of the puzzles and dungeons, but not all. Some overworld puzzles allow choice, and taking on enemies allows variety in the player's imagination with the tools at their disposal.
So there we have it. That's all I have to say about the Oracle of Ages. I really, really, really enjoyed this game. I went in with no nostalgia glasses. I had never played it. I knew barely anything about this game before I started it. I really appreciate a lot of the weird experimental stuff they did, some of that stuff showing up in later games, and I can clearly see where some of the stuff they experimented with led to other parts of Zelda games, or maybe their own better fleshed out mechanics down the road. Have you played Oracle of Ages? Sound off in the comments below what you think about the game and what you think about Oracle of Seasons. We'll get to that one eventually, but not quite yet. Until next time, bye.